At 80 years old, George Whitman was not supposed to be sprinting down the quiet suburban street where he lived. His neighbors were used to seeing him outside every morning, but usually with his gardening gloves on, trimming his roses, or walking slowly to the mailbox. What they didn't expect was to see him one spring afternoon running with the stride of a man 40 years younger, his arms pumping in rhythm, his feet pounding against the pavement with a speed that shocked anyone who happened to be watching. He wasn't just jogging, he was sprinting, and there was a story behind how he got to this point in his life. George had lived in Cedar Grove, a small American town tucked between rolling hills and wide meadows, for most of his life. Born in 1945, he grew up in a time when kids roamed the neighborhoods until the streetlights came on, when dinners were cooked from scratch, and when nobody thought about how many calories were in a slice of pie. He had been a strong athlete in high school, playing baseball and football, and for a while, he thought his life would be defined by sports. But like many others, adulthood brought different responsibilities. After graduating, he joined the Navy, served his country, and came back to marry his sweetheart, Linda, whom he met at a local church picnic. They built a family together, 3 children who eventually grew into adults with families of their own. George worked as a mechanic for nearly 4 decades, his hands always marked with grease and calluses. Life wasn't easy, but it was steady. Yet, as he entered his 70s, George noticed what most people his age did. Time seemed to take more than it gave. His knees ached in the morning. His memory sometimes slipped. And though he had never been one to complain, there were days when he wondered if he was slowly fading into the kind of man who just sat in his recliner, waiting for the days to pass. That all changed when Linda passed away after a short illness. George was devastated. They had been married for 55 years, and suddenly, the house that once felt alive with laughter, Sunday dinners, and grandchildren's visits felt unbearably quiet. Friends checked in on him, his children visited when they could, but loneliness settled on his shoulders like a heavy coat. Many men his age might have given up then, retreating further into solitude. But George realized something. He had a choice. He could sink into the emptiness, or he could try to build a new chapter for himself. It began simply. One morning, he walked outside and noticed the young boy next door kicking a soccer ball around. George, feeling a spark of curiosity, walked over. "Mind if I take a shot?" he asked. The boy, surprised but eager, handed him the ball. George's foot connected, and to his amazement, the ball soared across the lawn, higher and farther than he expected. The boy clapped. "Whoa, Mr. Whitman, you've still got it." That small moment lit something inside George that had been asleep for decades. The next day, George decided to go for a walk, not just to the mailbox, but around the block. It was harder than he thought. His breath came short, his legs protested, but he pushed himself. The day after, he walked again. Within weeks, walking turned into light jogging. He began reading articles about senior fitness, learning how the human body could rebuild strength even late in life. He swapped his sugary breakfasts for oatmeal and berries, replaced soda with water, and slowly began transforming his daily habits. By the time his 81st birthday rolled around, George wasn't just healthier, he was astonishing his doctors. During a routine checkup, his physician, Dr. Emily Carson, looked at his test results in disbelief. "George," she said, "I don't usually say this, but your heart, your blood pressure, even your muscle tone, it's like I'm looking at results from someone 20 years younger. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." George chuckled, but he knew deep down that he was rewriting the script for what aging could look like. His children began to notice too. At a family barbecue, his oldest son Mark pulled him aside. "Dad," he said, shaking his head with a grin, "you're moving around better than I am, and I'm 50. What's your secret?" George didn't have a magic pill or a fancy routine to point to. His answer was simple: consistency, curiosity, and refusing to accept that life was over just because he had passed a certain age. But the story of George's transformation didn't just stay within his family. One summer, his granddaughter Sarah, a college student majoring in media studies, filmed him doing 10 pull-ups in the backyard. She uploaded it to social media with the caption, "My grandpa is 81 and stronger than most guys at the gym." Within days, The video went viral. People across the country watched in amazement as an octogenarian pulled his chin over the bar with ease. Comments flooded in, some people inspired, others skeptical, but all intrigued. George laughed when Sarah told him he was trending. "Guess I'm an internet star now," he said. Reporters came knocking, curious about the 80-year-old who seemed to be aging in reverse. When asked what motivated him, George always gave the same answer. "I don't want to spend the years I have left sitting still. I want to keep moving, keep learning, keep living. Age is just a number, but spirit, that's what really keeps you young." Soon, George became a regular speaker at community centers, where he shared his story with other seniors who felt stuck. He told them how he started with something as small as walking to the corner, how he replaced one unhealthy meal with something nourishing, how he chose to challenge himself instead of giving up. People listened because he wasn't selling them anything, he was living proof that transformation was possible. One of the most unforgettable moments came when George entered a local, fun-run charity race. No one expected him to compete seriously. Yet when the starting whistle blew, George took off with steady determination. He didn't win, but he crossed the finish line without stopping, and the crowd erupted in applause. For George, it wasn't about medals or recognition. It was about proving, to himself and everyone watching, that age doesn't define what's possible. Years passed, and George's story continued to spread. Doctors studied his lifestyle, scientists wrote articles about the psychological power of purpose in old age, and everyday people felt encouraged to take small steps in their own lives. George never claimed he found a secret to immortality. Instead, he showed the world that choosing to move, choosing to learn, and choosing to engage with life was the closest thing to turning back the clock. By the time George turned 85, he had become a symbol in Cedar Grove and beyond. Children would wave at him when he ran down the street. Teens would ask to take photos with him. And older men and women often told him, "Because of you, I started walking again. Because of you, I feel like I've got more life left." One evening, as the sun set over his quiet town, George sat on his porch with his granddaughter Sarah. She asked him, "Grandpa, do you ever wish you were young again?" He smiled, shaking his head.
"No, sweetheart.
"I don't need to be young again. I just need to keep living the way I am now. That's the real trick, staying alive while you're alive." And in that moment, it was clear that George's greatest achievement wasn't how many push-ups he could do or how fast he could run at 80 years old. It was the fact that age